This recording started as well. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm very excited. We kicked off the stake off yesterday, so that's pretty fun. Just so you know, this is supposed to be an interactive session. We'll just spend a bit of time enjoying what the stake off is. It's a huge long forum post, a lot of content to digest. So spend about 20 minutes to half an hour walking through that, but then the rest of the time is yours, and it's really to ask questions. What we'll do is I'll go through the slides, and let's see, Tim seems to be here. Tim, can you speak?
Hey everyone.
There we go. So we'll quickly do intros of the people who are on the call from the team working on Celo. There's myself, I'm Claire, I'm the product manager working on Celo, and we also have Tim and Amy. So Amy, do you want to present yourself, and then we'll go to Tim?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Amy. I'm working on the mentor, so you might have gotten some emails from me, the mentorship program. It's not too late to be a mentor, so let me know if you have any questions with that. Then I'll give it to Tim.
Hey everybody, I'm Tim. I work on the protocol engineering team. I've been involved in the development of proof of stake and the Celo blockchain, so hopefully I can answer any of the technical questions that you've got.
And if you haven't seen Tim's webinar from last week, there's a recording and there's a full walkthrough of the proof of stake and how it works within the Celo protocol. So if you have questions with regards to how proof of stake works, that's a separate, usually it was a separate webinar. Obviously we can clarify things here. But really, I mean, first of all, before we get started, more than anything, we as a team who've been starting to build this protocol are excited to see the community come together, because this is a journey that we'll be doing together. We just started it, but our hope is that it's not just the team building Celo, but much more than the team who started building Celo, in not only running the protocol, but also contributing to the protocol. And this is not a project that belongs specifically to, you may have heard C Labs, so that's the team that's building Celo. The idea is Celo is a public good and everyone is free to contribute, and this is the start of the journey. And the Great Stake Off is a way to start this off. So very quickly, what we're gonna talk today is what is the stake off and who is it for. We'll go through how do we think about winners and rewards, the challenges linked to that. Then we'll go into timings. We'll do a quick overview of hardware and infrastructure. There's been a lot of questions on this, so I'm sure we'll have time in the Q&A to cover some of this as well. We'll talk a bit about the leaderboard and then how to get started for those of you who haven't gotten started, and what to do next if you're already set up. And then we'll open up for questions. So to start off, what is the stake off? So it's basically a way to compete, but also to collaborate on Celo's incentivized testnet, which if you didn't know by now is called Baklava. And it's an opportunity to earn as many Baklava test units, which are called BTUs. And you will see there's many ways on earning BTUs, and we'll talk a bit more about what a BTU is. But the idea is that you have some form of competition, you have opportunities to collaborate as well, and from there, there'll be ways and opportunities to earn Celo Gold. The objective of the stake off is threefold. The first is really for you to start to get familiar with the protocol, and more importantly, as a validator, get familiar with running the protocol. So that is from setting up your infrastructure to understanding the error codes, to understanding how the protocol works and the opportunities that are afforded within the protocol, but also its limitations and how it is similar and different from other protocols if you are already running other protocols as a validator. There's also other opportunities to get involved, which we'll talk about. The second objective is, because this is a community project, is also to start thinking about how do we think of engaging early adopters in a way that they are set up to be full participants when the main network launches, hopefully next year. And that means, because we're proof of stake protocol, that the assets within it are distributed to as many stakeholders as possible, because ultimately the stakeholders represent the protocol. And since the mission of Celo is to be as inclusive as possible, how do we make sure that that happens as of mainnet launch? And then the third element is to just gain experience and learn. So it's, this is still a test net. It's still being developed. That's not perfect. So we hope to find things that we can improve, all of us, from whether you're running your validator, whether you're participating to the code, or whether it's a team building Celo currently, which is a C Labs team. But either way, it's not designed, so there will be learning opportunities, but it's not designed to test the economics and the proof of stake game theoretical elements of the protocol. That is very hard to test. It's called adversarial economics. It's usually done within a very controlled environment, and it is not the objective of this stake off and this incentivized testnet. So with that in mind, who is this for? This is primarily for people or teams who are technical. So technical is a pretty broad term, but what we mean by technical is you should be familiar with the command line interface. You should be familiar with your operating system, understand how to do basic operations on your operating system, and be able to go from there. So for those who've already gone through the documentation, the getting started documentation, there's as much information as possible shared to make sure that everyone gets set up as best as possible. But there's obviously differences that vary by operating system, and without a technical background, it is totally possible to learn. It's just a bit more challenging. And so really, it's for people who enjoy this stuff and who, whether you're already a pro or who want to learn more, but you have a technical inclination. Now, there's different levels, and so you may have seen there's the buddy program, which means if you're not super technical or you're new to these distributed networks, you can pair up with a mentor, and that is someone who has a bit more experience who can fast track your progression and learning on how to operate a node on the Celo network. If you're non-technical and this is all gibberish, there is other opportunities to participate in the stake off. There will be one slide later where we'll talk about that. So I mentioned this is an opportunity to earn a mainnet Celo Gold. And the way it works is basically the winners of the stake off is not one group, but three. So it's a top three, what we call eligible participants with the most BTUs at the end of the stake off. So I just want to unpack this a bit. When we talk about eligible participants, and this is very important, we're talking about teams, not specifically individuals or validators, which means, for example, if you're a team of 5, and you're working at a company, then the eligible participant would be your entire team, not every 5 individuals. And what that means, why this is important, is basically what that means is you can only get fauceted once during the whole stake off per eligible participant or per team. So the objective of this was to make the stake off as accessible and inclusive as possible, which is if there are individual participants, they should be in the same starting blocks as a team of 5. And it wouldn't be very equitable to have a team of 5 get 5 times more Celo Gold at start than a team of 1. So by participants and eligible participants, we talk about a team specifically. The word eligible is basically just because there are some people who may not participate in the stake off or be eligible for winning. For example, members of the C-Lab team and their households are non-eligible, so they can participate in the stake off, but they will not be eligible to be a winner of the stake off. And the idea of 3 participants is this is a community effort, and we want that to get reflected in the way we think about our winners. Obviously, we want more than 3 people benefiting from the stake off. So the way it works is still in BTUs. The way it works is that you'll have many ways to earn BTUs, and we'll talk about what those baklava testnet units are. But essentially, we have a sort of step function that based on where you end up in the final ranking on the last day of the stake off, you will be eligible to earn up to 60,000 Celo golds if you're in the top 3 winners, and then it goes down to up to 10,000 Celo gold units for the 25th to the 50th participants. Anyone after the 50th position, let's say you're 51st or you're 55th, are essentially not eligible to earn a Celo gold units. That means Celo gold units on the mainnet. This was actually quite hard to design, mainly because as we think of it as a team, it was how do we make sure that we reward everyone who gets involved, but as well not reward people who just spin up a node and do nothing. And the idea is because we want to make sure that whoever participates in the stake off also participates in the mainnet, and we see some form of engagement. And so it was very hard to gauge how big the participation group would be. So given we can have up to 100 validator nodes, we cut it to about 50% of that, which is why you see 1st to 50th place, and anyone after 50th place are currently not eligible for Celo gold units. Having said this, there is potentially a possibility that if we see a very high participation level beyond the 50th place, that we may revise our terms and conditions. So just be aware of that this is not to be penalizing. This is more about trying to think about a design that is inclusive and that rewards active participation. So you're probably wondering by now, what is a baklava testnet unit? It's basically a combination of the Celo gold that is earned on the testnet. So these are testnet Celo gold, not mainnet Celo gold. Everywhere in the documentation and the communication materials, we use the acronym CGLD. This means that they are testnet Celo gold. They don't have any real world value, but they do contribute to your BTUs. Similarly, within your BTU calculation, we have testnet Celo dollars. The short version is CUSD. And those as well don't have real world value, but can contribute to your BTUs. And finally, there's another way to gain more BTUs, and that's through what we call challenge boosts. So there's a bunch of challenges that are going to come along, and for those participant entities who do join those challenges, will have an opportunity to boost their BTUs. There's a nice big equation on how this is all broken down. I want to walk you through a bit more of the stake off and the design, and at the end I'll share what this breakdown looks like to give you a bit more clarity on the BTUs, because there are many different elements in this equation. So I'm going to walk you through all of these elements, and at the end you'll see how they all tie together. So at a high level, how could you earn a BTUs? One is by running a validator on the network, which I think a lot of you are aware of. The other is to run a full node as well on the network. So the difference between a validator and a full node, Tim explained last week, but basically validators are responsible for participating in the consensus mechanism and writing the next block to the blockchain and actually processing the transactions, and they are paid epoch or they earn epoch rewards, as well as a part of the transaction fees. Full nodes cater to light clients. These are mobile phones, and they are also rewarded, but they are just rewarded in transaction fees. So for every transaction that they forward to the network, they take the transaction requests from mobile phones, they forward them to the network to be processed into a block that the validators take care of. They get a cut of that transaction fee, or a share is probably a better term, a share of that transaction fee. And so running a full node is another way to earn BTUs. Now, full nodes are dependent on transactions that are happening on the network. So you're probably thinking there's not that many users on the network today and not that many transactions. Do not worry, we have planned for you to have transactions on the network too. So that will come. So there's also opportunities to earn BTUs with a full node. And then you can participate in challenges. And there's a number of challenges. I think the first one that I really want to highlight is, in addition to running a validator and a full node, you can also run an attestation service. This is essentially, as you may know, and on the Celo protocol, you have a sort of PKI that matches phone numbers to addresses, and how that process happens in a decentralized way is through something called the Attestation Service, or the identity protocol. And we also need people to participate in running that part of the protocol, and that's called running an attestation service. And there will be ways to boost your rewards with that. There's one other element here that is not mentioned, but is worth noting, is that the protocol obviously rewards anyone who locks their Celo gold. And so if you recall from Tim's presentation, if you attended last week, if not, maybe you read it, but essentially epoch rewards are paid out to validators for validating, but also to Celo gold holders who lock up their gold. So as a validator, you have to lock up your gold to put up for slashing, but that locked gold can also earn epoch rewards. So that's another way to earn more Celo gold, which in turn allows you to earn more BTUs. But for the moment, let's just focus on the three here on the slide. And what I want to do now is I want to dive into the attestation challenge and the other challenges that will be coming afterwards. So the first challenge we have, which will be starting next week, is called the Attestation Challenge. Basically, this means processing text messages. So if any of you have used services, any website where they say, hey, confirm that you're trying to log in with your email, and they go, we sent you a text message to your phone with a code, enter that code, confirm that you have that phone number, and then you are logged in. It's the same thing on the Celo protocol. The only difference is, instead of having a centralized entity managing that process, it's a decentralized process, where essentially the protocol determines that whole process, and the attestation service plays the role of sending the text message that then the user has to prove they've received, which essentially proves that they have access to that phone number, which allows them to tie their phone number to the address on the network. And so basically, as a validator, it's expected to run the attestation service. And so anyone who completes more than 95% of the attestations will get to boost their BTUs by 20%. So what that means is, if the C Labs team will randomly send attestations, and there will be ways to see this on Block Scout. If you, as a validator, your attestation service, so that you need to spin up in parallel to spinning up your validator and validator group, all the instructions are online. If you have completed more than 95% of the requests sent to you, then the total BTUs you have at the end of the stake off, which is January 21st, will be boosted by 20%. So if you have 100 BTUs at the end of the stake off, you'll have a boost of 20%, which takes you to 120 BTUs. That first attestation challenge will run from next week, December 11th, to the Christmas break, which we'll see dates after all of this. Will stop on December 20th. And that is called phase 2. So we're run during phase 2. The next challenge is what's called the Master Validator Challenge. Essentially what this is a 3-hour remote audit by the team, and there'll be a whole list of items that will get checked, and it's basically items that check your operational security. So are you in a data center that has security, physical security? Do you have cameras? Do you have monitoring systems? And then the other element is how good is your infrastructure? How well are you connected to the internet? So in proof of stake, what counts is not necessarily the power of your machine. Yes, you need a decent and good server, but really what's important is access to a good internet connection. And so there'll also be there'll be one of these items on the checklist is also looking at the internet connection and the infrastructure there. If you're interested in seeing that list, it's up on the forum post, but basically each list item has a number of points. Each point corresponds to a percentage boost. So let's say you complete 3 of the 5 items on the list. Item number 1 has a 5%, has 5 points. Item number 2, 5 points, and item number 3, 10 points. That's 5 + 5 + 10 is 20. By the end of the stake off, you will have a 20% boost. Which means if you have 100 BTUs at the end of the stake off, that will turn into 120 BTUs. So it's basically the elements on the checklist just get added up, and that turns into a percentage that boosts your BTUs at the end of the stake off. There's a lot of questions about the remote audit. We have someone joining the team early January who is specialized in security and hopefully will be helping us lead that. So bear with us. That will all get communicated closer to phase 3, which is starting January 8th. The other thing I just want to highlight here is there's been some confusion around master validator and validator. There is no master validator on the network. Master validator is an analogy to master chef, which means you are a super validator who's passed a certain number of tests. In this case, if you pass more than 80% of the checklist, or you get more than 80 points on the checklist, you will get a master validator seal of approval. It's like thinking of like ISO certification. It means you qualify to be a professional validator to a certain extent, as the team has defined professional at this stage. But the idea is just that if there are people who are investing more in their operational security and in their performance, that they get recognized. And this idea is that that seal can then be used as you as a validator group or validator, you try to get either accepted into a validator group or as a validator group get elected by Celo Gold holders. It's kind of a form of trust, if you'd like to see it that way. How am I doing on time? Okay, so the next challenge, which is actually an ongoing challenge, so the attestation challenge was for phase 2 before Christmas, the master validator challenge is for phase 3 after Christmas, and then we have the buddy challenge. This is ongoing, and the idea here that I mentioned before, if you're not so technical, we match a mentor and a mentee, which is one non-technical and one technical validator together, and the mentor will get 5% of their mentees' BTUs at the end of the stake off. So if you are someone who's technically savvy and you want to help someone who's not so technically savvy, and that person does well, let's say you get 1,000 BTUs and that person gets 200, or let's make it 100, then the mentor will get their 1,000 BTUs plus 5% of the 100 BTUs that their mentee will have had, which means 5 BTUs. That was a bad example because the idea is that as a mentor, you try to get your mentee to get at least like 500 BTUs, which translates into a much bigger number. And then as a mentee, you just get to keep your 100 BTUs, for example. Nothing affects your BTUs. You're not giving away any of your BTUs to your mentee, to your mentor. So, and then again, this is the BTUs measured at the end of the stake off which is currently planned. Obviously, dates are pending, you know, can move pending what happens on the network, but currently planned for January 21st, 2020. If you have questions about the Buddy Challenge, please contact Amy. She's coordinating that. She is also helping people get matched. And if you need to get matched, just email hello@celo.org. Now, for those of you who are going, wait, are there other ways I can participate in baklava and you know, earn, have a chance to earn or receive mainnet Celo Gold? And yes, there is. And there's ways, and so this is not even, there's no BTUs in this. This is going straight to a chance to receive mainnet Celo Gold, bypassing BTUs altogether. So if you're non-technical or you're feeling extra motivated, there is ways to, by contributing to the code, to the documentation, to creating educational content. We also have our security vulnerability disclosure program, also called Security Bounties, that will be launching with awards there. And so that is currently under development. The expected launch date of this whole program is probably in the new year. But there will be opportunities as well to receive mainnet Celo Gold without having to necessarily run a node on the baklava network. So I talked about timings all over the place. This is kind of to put everything back into one place. So we're currently in the warm-up period, December 4th to December 10th. And then from next Wednesday, December 11th to the 20th, which is just before Christmas, the Friday before the Christmas break, there's the Attestation Challenge. This is what is called phase 2. Then there'll be a break. During the break, what happens is the network will continue to run, but the epoch rewards are going to be stopped, and so will be the exchange. So this is a good opportunity to maybe talk about the exchange. I'm just going to finish the timings and then mention the exchange. And then after the Christmas break and the New Year, end of year break, or the holiday break is probably a better term to use because everyone has different holidays. From January 8th, it's again Wednesday to the 23rd. Actually, that date is wrong. It should be the 21st. There'll be the Master Validator Challenge. So there will be communication coming. The communication is always by email and posted on the forum. So if you're having doubts of where there's information, everything is on the forum. We're, as a team, going to try also recap everything that's happening in other channels and try post that on the forum as well. Just a quick word on the exchange. So Celo obviously has a stability protocol, and as part of that stability protocol, there's a sort of decentralized exchange. It works a bit like a Uniswap. It's called CP-Doto, and basically it allows anyone on the network to exchange Celo dollars for Celo Gold. That exchange rate is going to be pretty moderate. It's not going to vary much. It's going to have a pretty low volatility. And the idea of that is we don't want people earning a crazy amount of BTUs just by playing around with the exchange, right? But we also want to give people an opportunity to change the dollars into gold. So during the break, the epoch rewards will be turned off and the exchange will be turned off, which means there'll be no opportunity to turn dollars into gold and gold, Celo testnet gold into testnet dollars. Okay, so what do I need to run a validator? This is why there's been many, many questions. This is the strong recommendation of the team. So obviously mentioned this, a high availability network. The details have been now published in the docs. This is by no means mandatory, but highly recommended if you want to have a competitive machine on the network. This means a really good internet connection. That's what that first point means. The second, server class hardware means this is probably not the best to run this on your laptop. This machine needs to be up and running all the time. So basically you want a machine that could be a server. And that's what's meant by the term server class. So any basic server in the last few years should do the job. There's been specific questions about memory and CPU power, etc. there are recommendations online, but everyone has a different perspective on this. Even within the ecosystem, you will ask different validators, professional validators, and they will have a different opinion on what's the perfect or the right hardware setup. So whilst there are recommendations, which are listed as requirements, everyone is ultimately free to do as they please. This is just that the team wants to make sure that you get set up in a way that your machine performs on the network. The third point is to have a Linux distribution, so run some form of Linux. All the instructions assume this. The third is to put your machine, and particularly your validator, in a physically secure space. So this is a machine, as Tim explained last week, proof of stake ultimately depends on the security of the network, and the security of the network depends on the validators. And so the validator machine is not just security of the protocol design, it's also about the physical security of the machine. So making sure that that machine is set up in a secure facility. And this is typically, something that's typically used is what is known as co-location or colo facilities. These are just extra secure areas or buildings that allow you to either to set up your own servers in there, and they typically have a good internet connection. They will typically connect into your cloud services like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, and sometimes they even facilitate the purchasing of hardware, but they have all the security monitoring elements in there with like SASs to access the facilities, etc. And then what you'll want is to protect your validator so your machine behind what is known as a proxy node. So rather than putting your validator directly on the internet, you hide it behind a proxy node. That proxy node can run in the cloud, for example, on one of the main cloud services. And the idea here is that it protects your validator from denial service attacks. All the setup instructions basically show you how to set up with a proxy node. This is a separate server. It's a separate machine in addition to your validator machine. And lastly, there's the attestation service. So this again is just a basic machine. It can be anywhere on the internet. It doesn't necessarily have to be hidden behind a proxy, and that takes care of the identity service, the identity protocol, or the attestation service. So linked to all of that, yes, do I really need all of this? Well, recommended, highly recommended. Nothing is mandatory. Everyone is free to do as they please. The next question is, how much will this cost me? And again, this is going to be a question of, well, there's no perfect answer because there's a lot of variables, some of which vary a lot. And it also depends on the professionalism of each validator on the network. So it can depend on where you are. If you're located in certain countries, where the cost of labor is very high, for example, like in Scandinavia or in Switzerland, it's going to be very different than if you're running in a country where the cost of labor is cheaper. And same thing for access to some other like facilities. For example, real estate in New York is obviously going to be more expensive than real estate in the Midwest. On Middle America. It will also depend on the infrastructure you're using, like how secure that infrastructure is. Are you using a colo center? Are you running this from at home and making it secure? It depends as well if you're doing this solo, or if you have a team and you have employees, and then that depends on where those employees are located. And there's more. We can take questions about this. And then it really also depends on how you set up your machines and how many machines you're running. Because each validator group can have up to 5 machines. So we expect some entities or some teams to have one validator group with 5 machines, and we expect other entities maybe to pool themselves together and have one validator group between themselves with 5 different team members or individuals running a validator within that group. So there is no straight answer there. Now, because there's so many variables, there's also been a lot of questions of like, how important it's written, this is required. No, the protocol will still run or should run. You may have some issues like in messages. I set up a machine where I didn't have enough memory and I got a message from the server saying you may want to upgrade your machine. So you may run into some issues, but ultimately what really counts is that as a validator group you get elected, and so it's really about how the Celo Gold holders perceive you. And obviously you know, they are, because there's a lot of value in the network, they also want to make sure that they are electing validators who are going to help them secure that value on the network. Otherwise everyone loses in the equation. Also, just note that as a validator, there is a performance metric in the protocol. So whilst rewards, epoch rewards, are delivered in Celo dollars, validators who do not perform well, and this can be particularly in the case of unreliable internet connections, will get fewer rewards, and they will penalize not just themselves, but the entire group. So you may be able to run a validator, but you may not be exposed to the epoch rewards you would be expecting. And then related to all of that, obviously the protocol allows more than one validator per validator group. As mentioned, the idea here is to be as inclusive as possible. So the way the fauceting process works is every team or participant entity can get at most 24,000 testnet Celo Gold. And the idea here is that every team starts with one validator and one validator group and a bit of change. So that's how everyone starts. Now, as you've seen, there's many ways to earn BTUs, whether it's running the Attestation Service and boosting yourself, whether it's locking up some testnet Celo Gold, whether it's running a full node on top. And so as long as you earn enough testnet Celo Gold to set up a new validator, and it's 10,000 testnet Celo Gold to lock up to spin up a new validator, then teams are more than welcome to set up more than one validator. It's just a question of how those teams will earn their testnet Celo Gold. And so the idea here is that, like, once you get started, there's ways to continue interacting. It's not about just setting up your machine and walking away. And so with all of this, you've noticed that, well, if you've got 5 machines, let's say you do really well and you manage to get 5 machines into your validator group, all for your one team, then which address will get featured on the leaderboard, because it's all the same team. So all those testnet Celo Gold and Celo dollars are all the teams, they all accumulate to the team's BTUs. So right now, when you get fauceted, the address that will get featured on the leaderboard is the address, it's your validator address. It's when you sign up, when you request to get fauceted, you have to share your validator group address and your validator address. The one that gets featured on the leaderboard is the validator address. So then you're probably asking, how do I make sure that, the assets, my testnet assets, Celo Gold and Celo dollars that are sitting on my validator group address get featured on the leaderboard too? And so there is a way to do that. And the way it goes is you basically use the Attestation Service. So what the Attestation Service does is, I mentioned that there was a way to link mobile phone numbers to addresses, but it also allows you to claim what we call metadata, which is allow you to claim that you have a certain URL or that you own other addresses on the network. So what you can do is you can tie to your validator address the other addresses that your team owns by proving that you own them, and that means by signing. So it's called proof of possession, but essentially you prove that you possess the private keys of the other addresses that your team has. And so that is a whole other process of how you tie this together using the Attestation Service. And that is all going to come online next week with phase 2, including the directions on how to set this up. So just be aware that whilst you may be earning testnet rewards in various addresses, there's a way to link them all to one address and have that one address featured on the leaderboard, so you know where you stand. So this is the recap of all the ways of how your BTUs are calculated. So let's unravel this. I mentioned that you can have several addresses. So everyone starts with 2 addresses. They start with their validator address and their validator group address. But if you spin up a full node, you'll have a full node address. If you spin up 2 full nodes, you'll have another 2 full node addresses. You spin up another, and so on, right? So it adds up. So you can have up to n addresses. Each address is composed of a combination of locked Celo Gold, and these are all testnet assets, by the way. So locked testnet Celo Gold, testnet Celo Gold, and testnet Celo dollars. These are all added together and convert to sum up to a total testnet Celo Gold value. So the Celo dollars are converted at the exchange rate on the last day of the stake off. So anyone is free to exchange their Celo dollars in and out during the stake off, but if accounts have Celo dollars at the end of the stake off, it's the exchange rate at the end of the stake off that will be used, which I believe is 4 p.m. UTC on the 21st of January, with the current timelines, pending that those timelines, they may change, who knows. Right now, that's the current plan. So at each address, we calculate the total Celo Gold value, and then we sum all of that up together. And then for those who've participated in the Buddy Challenge, they would get 5% of their mentee Celo. Actually, this is wrong. This equation is 5% of their mentees BTUs, which is even more. And then all of this whole sum is multiplied by your multiplier boosts, which is participating in the Attestation Challenge, participating in the Master Validator Challenge. And that basically sums up the BTUs. So the leaderboard actually calculates all of this dynamically throughout the stake off. So what you'll see featured on the leaderboard, as long as you tie all your addresses to 1, is the BTU number on the right. Just be aware that the Celo Gold value down here, 5% of your mentee, it should be here BTU, not Celo Gold value. But what you'll see on the leaderboard is really where you stand, as long as everyone has done their setup properly. And then how do I get started? So you should have all received an email, but basically asked to be faceted, set up your nodes, and then there's a whole bunch of machines you need to get set up, your validator, your proxy, your attestation service, and then you have to set up your validator group, and you have to get elected to participate in the process. It's quite long to explain here. I'm not sure it's worth it. If you're interested, we can walk through the setup instructions. But there's very detailed setup instructions that explains each step. So if you haven't done it so far, have a look. And if you have any questions, feel free to ping the team on Discord. Talking about Discord, here are the communication channels used by the team. So any updates, as mentioned, are emailed and posted on the forum. So if you're ever confused as to where the information is, just revert back to the forum. And if things are posted elsewhere, there will always be a post on the forum linking to those other posts. And then discussions happen on Discord. Obviously, if you have questions that could benefit the broader community, think of asking them on the forum so that that stays in memory and other people can also access those answers. And also, if you are asking those questions on Discord and they don't cover personal information, try have those discussions on public channels versus messaging the team members directly. It just allows the broader community to benefit of the answer, and it avoids that the team repeats the answer over and over to different participants in separate channels. And so with that, we will move to questions. So I think there's been a lot of discussion. Amy, would you be able just kind of to help filter out the questions that have come through?
Yeah, let's start with the technical questions here. We have one that's regarding secure locations for servers. Will major cloud providers highly ranked on physical security?
Tim, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yes, so major cloud providers obviously have like great security setups. I think the concern really is that it's sort of twofold. One is that this key material is extremely valuable, and like you're going to want to like operate the validator node specifically, not talking about the proxy or the attestation service, in a sort of single tenant fashion. That doesn't necessarily mean not running with a container or inside a VM, but just having only stuff that you control also on that machine. The second thing is that we are going to be, and this is I think the major reason, that the second thing is we'll be adding support for hardware wallets and HSMs. I think I saw another question about, is the Nano Ledger supported? So because we use BLS signatures to sign, for validators have two keys essentially, like one to participate in the actual messages that go through consensus, and then a second one, a BLS signature, which is different from the sort of signature used in many other proof of stake networks. There's currently very little hardware wallet support for that signature. So we've been, the C-Labs team has been building a bunch of that support. The Nano Ledger X is a programmable HSM. That looks like the best starting point. We have a prototype of that working. We hope that it will be able to be delivered for phase 3, but it depends. Obviously, if you go and deploy on a public cloud, you are not going to be able to go and plug in your Nano Ledger X. And the HSMs that are supported by AWS and GCP are not compatible with BLS signing. So that situation may well change in the future, but for now, I think the route that will help you get towards the most secure like setup for a validator is to basically place a machine that is single tenant in a facility where you are going to be able to go and plug a HSM at some point into that machine.
Right. And the next question asked is, can a participant set up 2 validators and ask to join the validator group of another participant, i.e. not running their own group? And would they be incentivized to do so?
Yeah,
so
that's
go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, go on, Claire. Okay, I was going to say, yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, so the type of collusion we want to avoid here is in the sort of Great Celo Stakeoff in general, is where a entity pools funds. And so you'll see from the terms and conditions that we like say it's prohibited to sort of transfer funds directly between different individuals. And Claire mentioned earlier that only a single, like, you know, if you're a single team, you can only really get forfeited once. Now, that being said, it is totally fine, I think, for participants to set up 2 validators and to fall back to another, like basically try and get admitted by a validator group that they're not in control of. That's exactly, I guess, like one of the forms of one of the arrangements that we do expect, I think, to see in the production mainnet. The question of would they be incentivized to do so? There is a notion of a group share, which is the fraction of rewards that a validator group takes that would otherwise have gone to the validator. And that is essentially a market. It is set on a per group basis. The group has complete control over that. And so the validator is sort of at the whim of the validator group in terms of being able to take that percentage slice of the rewards. Having said that, the advantage of not running a group yourself is that a validator group could be very attractive if there are potentially other validators in that group as well. and they become a destination for more voters. I mean, this is, I guess, less about the stake off, but yeah, you also don't have to put up a stake for your own validator group from that point of view as well. So yeah, I'll leave it as a sort of question for the participants to figure out the incentives. But it's certainly like allowed, I guess, within the rules of the game.
Yeah, I think just a watch out, read the terms and conditions carefully, because we really like, the idea here is just to be inclusive and fair for all. So the idea of like, it just gets complicated. Like the terms and conditions do say no transfer of assets between different participants. So whilst there are ways to pool efforts together under one validator group, it's a very fine line. So make sure to read the terms and conditions very carefully, because there is a risk of disqualification. And if you do have questions with your specific setup, do reach out to the team and we can help you answer that question or those questions.
Great. Next, I'm gonna get to everyone's question. I'm just kind of trying to queue them up in a way that relieves the flow. So next question, if we would like to change our validator, proxy, or attestation hardware after spinning it up, can we port our existing addresses to the new hardware?
Yes. So the addresses are not tied specifically to the hardware. All you need to do is move the I guess the wallets, the private keys off those machines. So in fact, one of the things that we will be like talking a lot more about in the coming weeks is key rotation. It's absolutely a desirable and security-minded thing to do, to rotate keys, and the protocol actually allows you to change the keys associated with a registered validator or registered validator group even while you're elected. So in that sense, you can, so long as you retain the key, the primary key, you can sort of you can actually like move between different hardware or different running instances, or just on the same instance change your keys like on the fly. So yeah, we can potentially provide some more detailed guidance on that.
Yeah, if you have questions about the keys, there's a summary at the beginning of the Getting Started as a Validator in the documentation. And then as well, it's worth noting that the file that you want to back up and that can be portable is called the key store file.
Right. And the next question, what is the best way to determine your node is running sufficiently, and how is performance determined?
Yeah, great question. So I guess the first thing to do, like, you know, to check that your node is actually running is look at ETH stats. So we have a network monitoring tool, which is probably familiar to folks who know Ethereum, which is linked from the end of the Getting Started guide. Your node should be able to send like regular heartbeats and statistics into that. From there, you can see the status of the whole network, and you should be able to see whether your validator is elected and whether it is like actively validating. I think on top of that, probably good practice is to export the metrics from Celo blockchain and to put them into a monitoring tool. At the moment, we haven't provided any instructions about how to do that, but you can, there's a way of basically getting those metrics out in Prometheus format and importing them into a tool like Grafana, and building dashboards using a tool like Grafana, and yeah, being able to see exactly what's going on your machine, and being able to see, I guess, telltale signs of when things are going wrong. And I think that's some of the sort of operational like knowledge that having built some of this, the C Labs team can share more of. But I think also a big purpose for the sort of great Celo Stakeoff is for everybody to like learn what those telltale signs are and just sort of get the feel of the software and get the feel of when things are going wrong and like what to do about it. It's basically building up the sort of operational like run book. And so yeah, we'll share more details about that. But broadly, looking at ETH stats and checking that your node appears on that list and is working fine is the most important thing.
I just want to add to that that the grant program has launched. There will be more communication coming out, but within that grant program, there is an opportunity for other community members to submit grants for validator tools, and that includes building, monitoring, and performance tools. So have a look at that as well if you are interested in helping build some of those tools. I think, Tim, there was also the question on the performance metric and how that is calculated.
Yeah, so I guess I'll refer you back to the webinar recording last week or the documentation for detail on that. But basically, validators are rewarded based on their uptime. A validator is considered up if it is actively participating in consensus, i.e. it's having its signature that only it can produce included in blocks. You basically have a sort of grace period where you need your signature included in at least one in every 10 blocks, in at least one block in a sort of sliding window. And from that point of view, you're considered like, as long as you don't have any periods of downtime of like less of more than a minute, you're considered like up 100% of the time. And from there, any downtime definitely like contributes to having this what's called a lower epoch uptime score. And then we track the uptime score on sort of an exponentially moving average basis. So like your uptime score factors in both what's happened this epoch and what's happened in previous epochs as well. So yeah, I guess like to highlight one of the reasons you want to set up with a good internet connection is that half the time it's not going to be your machine going wrong, it's going to be like internet glitches, and so prioritizing that in your setup is a good idea.
Cool. So we have one quick hardware question and then two rewards questions, and then we're going to get to some of the community questions. So first is, is Ledger X supported? If so, where can we receive the docs?
Yep, that is going to be the sort of first target for a HSM. It is not yet available, but as soon as it is, we'll let everybody know. I think the C Labs team is targeting like end of the year, early start of next year for this.
Cool. And just questions on the reward. How are group share rewards distributed? Does 100% of the group share go to the address that registered the group, or is it distributed to all the addresses voting for the group?
The group share is just the portion that goes to the group. So it's the address that registered the group. The distribution is entirely done in the protocol. So it's the protocol basically figures out how much the validator should receive, slices off the portion for the group, hands that directly to the group according to the group share, and hands the rest directly to the validator. And then on top of that, voters for the group receive rewards separately. So again, I think the webinar last week talks about this in quite a lot of detail.
I was going to say something and I forgot. Yes, I remember. So the team has built sort of a validator calculator, which is basically a way for people to get a rough estimation of what their rewards could look like. And that takes into account things like group share. And so that's just been finished. It's just been published. What we will do is for everyone who is registered for this webinar, it will get emailed out. It will also get posted on the forum, and then there will probably be a blog post explaining a bit more how to use it. So just keep an eye out for that. But we will be sharing that so that you all have a better idea of how everything ties together.
Great. And the next question, when mainnet goes live, how many Celo Gold will be minted in the Genesis? Will this be a fixed amount?
Yeah, so that number is getting, I think it is getting worked. It hasn't yet been communicated, but there is a plan to communicate what the whole rollout will look like. So just bear in mind, just have a bit of patience with us. And as soon as the team is ready to communicate that, it will get communicated. To be aware, there's obviously a 30, I think currently planned, obviously everything is governable through the protocol, but there's a 30-year minting period planned as of launch. And then obviously, given this is proof of stake, there's a certain amount that will be already minted or available, and this is split between many different entities, from what goes into the reserve that backs up the stable assets to some of the early Celo Gold purchasers, to market makers, to participants of the stake off. So those numbers are still a bit in flux, but as soon as there's a better, there's a bit more firm understanding of what that would look like at mainnet, they will get communicated.
Great. And we had one question around would something like translating content to Portuguese count as a contribution for, I think this was regarding the challenges.
Yes, this is part of the community challenges. So indeed, translation. So we are looking at different types of platforms to enable this. Just bear with us as we work through the details, which are taking a bit longer than planned, but there will be ways to get and opportunities. Obviously, everyone needs to be eligible, and please take a look at the terms and conditions, but there will be an opportunity to get rewarded in mainnet Celo Gold for translating content into other languages.
And I think one last question vaguely that I saw is the rewards, BTU rewards starting from phase 2 versus phase 1 and what's going on now, just clarifying that detail.
Yeah, so the BTU rewards in phase 1 do not count towards the leaderboard or to anything. This is just a test kind of dry run warm-up period, so everyone gets familiarized with how everything works together, setup questions, how the leaderboard works, playing around with everything. You can break things, you're not going to lose anything. And then the idea is when phase 2 starts, and that's when the BTU start counting towards the leaderboard, and that will carry through to phase 3 all the way until the end of the stake off.
Great. I think there's one last question. Is it possible to combine community challenges and send them to a validator?
So if I understand the question correctly, just to be very clear, so the validators are participating in the baklava testnet. They are earning testnet Celo Gold and testnet Celo dollars that have no real world value, and these add up to be a BTU. In the case of community challenges, these are not testnet Celo dollars or Celo Gold. These are mainnet gold units, so they are actually considered a different type of asset in terms of what they represent, and they do not combine with the testnet assets. So if in the documentation you read Celo Gold units, those mean mainnet Celo Gold units. Just please be aware, this is just an opportunity or chance to earn them. By no means does it guarantee it. There's a few elements tied to all of this, and then in the testnet case, it's just testnet. They don't have value. It's the BTUs and the ranking on the leaderboard that ultimately counts.
And so that wraps up all the questions. If anyone has other questions, please put them in the chat now. This is a good chance. If you have one-on-one or specific questions, please ask them in the Discord validators channel, and we can, where everyone, as Claire mentioned, everyone could see, and maybe they're having similar problems, or someone can answer them for you as well. There is one. What is the easiest way to see a validator node's uptime score?
The answer is it is getting built.
That's a great question. It's something that we will try and put into ETH stats. Yeah, the answer is it's difficult to do right now, but we'll. I hope we can expose it via the CLI in ETH stats and also in Block Scout as well.
Great. So that's all the questions.
Well, thank you, everyone. Big thank you. Very excited to have you all join and participating, and more than anything, looking forward to the coming weeks and months together and getting to know each other a bit better. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you online soon, I'm sure. Have a good day or evening, depending on where you are in the world.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Claire.
Uh-oh, what happened? Did I stop the recording? Did I lose the recording? Pause recording.